ReleaseWire helps businesses connect with interested journalists and bloggers. Check out the link in the description to save 25% on your first press release.
Admiral, radar shows that we have liberals approaching at 3 o'clock, and libertarians at 9 o'clock, and conservatives at 6 o'clock. They're coming from every angle, every viewpoint. Oh, it's Political Radar with your hosts, Rhonda and Elliot.
Hey, all you political junkies, welcome to Political Radar, the best 30 minutes of unscripted and uncensored political talk you will hear all day. We have episode 40 today, which is kind of a achievement, I would have to say, right, Elliot?
Yeah, I was saying, where's the party? We should be having a party. Well,
I think we're having a big party because we have somebody that actually came all the way from Madison to join us today.
Wow, that was quite the segue.
Thank you. Matt Rothschild, he is the executive director of Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be on. I hear it's a great podcast, so I wanted to...
Who'd you hear that from? It's all lies.
Colleen Grzinski.
So we have a lot going on in Wisconsin in regards to campaign finance. What's going on? Like, people just don't think it's important?
Well, I think people think it's important, but they don't know necessarily what to do about it. I think people understand by a wide margin, both in Wisconsin and around the country, that our democracy isn't working the way it's supposed to. The system is rigged, and somehow we need to unrig it. I saw a poll about a year ago that said 84% of the public thinks that big money has too much sway over our politics, and it's bipartisan. 80% of Republicans agreed with that. And so there's this widespread sentiment out there that things aren't working right. And actually, Jimmy Carter said within the last year that our democracy isn't working. We've become an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. So I spend a lot of my time at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign fighting political bribery.
And what does Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, what are they doing?
So we do a couple things. First of all, we're trying to make the democracy work here in Wisconsin and to some extent nationally. We have a really cool asset, and that is we have a public database of more than 1 million contributions in Wisconsin coded. So you can go in and enter your neighbor's name and see who he or she's been donating to if you're curious about that. But it gives you, other than just being voyeuristic, it gives you a chance to see who the big money people are paying and perhaps what they're getting in return as far as favors. And the thing that concerns me above all is that you and I and your listeners and viewers, they don't have an equal say, an equal voice as to who gets nominated to run, who gets elected, what policies are pursued by the elected officials once they're in there, because it's the big boys have all the power right now, or almost all the power. And that's a real problem for a democracy. Actually, there were two professors, one in Princeton and one in Northwestern, that studied 20 years of public policy, something like 1,800 issues. You know what their conclusion was? The majority does not rule. The people don't get what the people want, except in one circumstance, and that's when the top 1% and the big business interests want it too. Otherwise, we're out of luck.
Money changes everything, right?
Yeah, and I think that's not what we're taught in 7th grade civics class or in high school social studies class. And so there's a real problem. I mean, even Donald Trump recognized this problem at the first Republican debate, if you can remember back there. There are 10 other candidates up there, and he says, I've given to a lot of you guys, and when I call, you do what I want you to do. I mean, that's the problem in a nutshell.
And we really need some transparency to happen as well. And so I think I'm sure most people are aware at this point that Scott Walker is who we're going to talk about today, my favorite person. Yeah. He's got some interesting things out there, some latest news about what he's doing, what he has been doing, what he did during the 2012 recall campaign. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, well, there's been a huge expose over the last couple of weeks in the Guardian newspaper out of London, of all places, released many of the emails in the John Doe 2 investigation.
Isn't that interesting? We actually need international news to actually help some investigative
I don't know. I mean, I'm all for
journalism.
whistleblowers, so I don't care where they dump the email, on whose lap they dump those emails. I'm just glad the emails got out there. But these emails were about the John Doe 2 investigation, which was looking into whether Walker was violating the law when he was coordinating with outside groups. And what these emails demonstrate is that he was brazenly coordinating with these outside groups, especially Wisconsin Club for Growth. So what Walker was doing while he's been governor, he'd fly all around the country to sit on the laps of millionaires and billionaires and beg them for money, but not money for the Scott Walker campaign, not money for the Republican Party of Wisconsin. He would tell these CEOs, write a check out to Wisconsin Club for Growth. And he did that because they could give unlimited amounts of money and anonymously to Wisconsin Club for Growth. If they were giving to him, the most they could have given was $10,000 when he's running for governor. But if they gave through Wisconsin Club for Growth, they could give an unlimited amount.
And this is where the campaign finance laws apply.
Right. The law applies and the Wisconsin Supreme Court's decision apply. Those are the two things that are happening at the same time here.
Yeah, so he's not allowed to talk to someone who wants to donate to an outside group. Well,
it's not the question of talk to, it's fundraise for. There's a question as to, what exactly is coordination.
Right.
So
because the way I see it, if somebody says, here's a check for $50,000, he goes, whoa, I can't take that. The limit's $10,000. If you have other money to spend, you should spend it with one of these groups. I don't know how bad that is.
Well, it's bad, and it's bad for two reasons. Because we in a democracy should be able to impose realistic common sense limits about what individuals can give or corporations can give to people running for office. And also we should have disclosure. Disclosure is key. Even Antonin Scalia, the right-wing U.S. Supreme Court justice, said, if we don't have disclosure, we're no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave. People should be able to stand up and represent, who they are and what they believe in and take the heat if there's heat that comes. And I agree with that. One of the few things I agree with Antonin Scalia about. But by giving through these outside groups, they were hiding themselves. And they were giving way more than what they could. And that's a problem. And corporations were giving directly to Wisconsin Club for Growth, and corporations could not give to Friends of Scott Walker because that was against the law. It's still against the law for corporations to give directly to candidates, but after the disastrous rewrite of our campaign finance law last November in Madison, and I was one of the only people up in the balcony there till about 10:30 or 11 at night. There was a page, and there was a state police officer, Capitol police officer, and there was me. Of course, there were a lot of people from the press downstairs, but virtually no citizens were up there. And what they did was just, first of all, make it a lot easier for rich people to give money because they doubled the amount of money you could give. Before you could give $10,000 to someone running for governor. Now you could give $20,000. And who among our listeners and viewers can give $10,000, much less $20,000? So, rich and poor alike can give as much as they want to political candidates. And secondly, they said the sky's the limit as far as donating to political parties. Used to be a $10,000 limit. Now people are giving $1 million to the Democratic Party or Republican Party. And they said corporations could give up to $12,000 to political parties and political committees. And then they said coordination is legal. And so what's going to happen, let me just try to illustrate it this way. Say I'm running for governor, and I've got a multimillionaire friend. The most my friend can give me is $20,000 today. And I'd have to disclose that my multimillionaire friend gave me $20,000. I'm going to tell my multimillionaire friend, don't be a chump. Don't give me $20,000. Give $20 million to this group over here that I control and I'm working with called something silly like Badgers for Eternal Victory. Give it to Bev. Give Bev $20 million. And no one's going to ever know about it because the kicker is Bev doesn't have to disclose. So he can give 1,000 times the legal limit to this outside group. And I will go tell that outside group what ads to run, where to run them, how many times to run them. It would be as if he gave me the money directly, but he's giving it to this outside group. That's just a total end around, I think.
So do you think it's practical, though, to require every organization that ever says anything political to disclose every dollar that they get, though? That's where it sort of breaks down for me.
Well, I would say within 60 days of an election, if any group is running an advertisement that mentions a candidate for office, the least we can do is require disclosure from that group as to where they're getting their money. We should know who's splattering our screens with mud, who's paying for the mud, who might want to expect something on the backside for all the mud they're spraying on the TVs.
Well, so TV ads are less and less effective over time. Fewer people are watching less and less TV, right? They're watching online advertising. And that becomes a little bit difficult to track because everyone is media now. So what's to stop a group from having a podcast? What's to stop a group from having online ads of some kind or having a blog or a website? And where do you draw the line as to what's influential, what's advertising?
Well, so there are two interesting parts of that question. One is how influential is TV anymore? And they're still raising a lot of money for TV, so TV still is really important. And if if a group is advertising on the web, kind of micro-targeting, which is the rage, I still think they should be able to disclose. The other part of your question, which is a much more difficult one to answer, frankly, is what if everybody's a member of the media? Because the media isn't restricted by the First Amendment. By whatever interpretation you want of the First Amendment, Congress can pass no law. Bingo. So that it would be a kind of a way around that for people. It already is a way around it for Fox News, which is just a daily organ of the Republican Party, or Rush Limbaugh, people like that. So they're getting around it that way. But I still think by imposing reasonable limits and requiring disclosure, we'd limit a lot of the nasty ads that we're seeing. People would have to take responsibility for the ads if they're the candidate themselves instead of hiding behind this group. We know who it is, and the big boys couldn't really dominate in the way that they are now. I mean,
So
under Walker,
can we flash forward, though? Because I think what's important is people need to know what's happening right now. This was a few weeks ago that The Guardian came out with this article. And his response was, Walker's response was basically, there's nothing to see here, right? That was his response.
That was his response, and the courts have said it was legal. Well, the court that said it was legal was the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is a corrupt court.
Because weren't there a few judges that actually received some sort of benefit from some of these people that actually gave money to Walker?
Well,
isn't there a paper trail there?
More troubling than that, because the decision was 4-2. The four conservative justices benefited by more than $8 million in campaign expenditures, by some of the very groups under investigation by the John Doe 2 prosecutor, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, Wisconsin Club for Growth, for instance. And Prosser in his race against Kloppenberg barely won. And these outside groups outspent him by, at least 10-1 in helping him win. He should have had WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce logo on his black robe because they bought him that seat. And then they were being investigated in the John Doe 2 case, and Prosser and his three other conservative allies just threw the case out. And he had a duty to get off that case because there's a U.S. Supreme Court case about a West Virginia coal company CEO who spent a couple $1 million to elect the Chief Justice of West Virginia, and then that Chief Justice threw out the lawsuit against the coal company that had killed people. And they said, that judge, when you're getting that much money, you've got a conflict of interest. All can see, and so you should get off the case. That's why I call it a corrupt court.
So a few days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court went into closed session to see if they want to revisit this, correct?
Yeah.
And so where is that now?
And so we'll find out whether they decide to take this appeal of the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision from July 2015. So the appeal was brought not by the special prosecutor because the corrupt Wisconsin Supreme Court fired him. And then they did allow the district attorneys of Milwaukee County, Dane County, and Iowa County to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll find out later in October whether the U.S. Supreme Court decides to take the case. If they take the case, then they'll probably hear the case in this next session, and we'll know by the end of next June, for instance, whether the John Doe 2 investigation will continue. To me, the most important thing isn't whether Scott Walker's ever indicted. I don't wake up in the middle of the night, rub my hands together, and pray that he's indicted. What's important to me is that the U.S. Supreme Court reestablish the bright line that it's drawn over 40 years in precedents at the U.S. Supreme Court in campaign finance decisions, that if you are a candidate, you can't coordinate with these independent groups. Even Anthony Kennedy, the author of what I thought was a horrible decision, Citizens United, back in 2010, said independent expenditures by definition are independent of the candidates. So the Wisconsin Supreme Court came down with a decision 180 degrees different from what the U.S. Supreme Court said, and what the U.S. Supreme Court says is supposed to be the law of the land.
For some, they agree with that.
The problem is there's no accountability here in Wisconsin. That's what's really driving me crazy. There's just no accountability at the court, at the legislature. I'm hoping there are going to be some accountability either at the U.S. Supreme Court, or we filed a complaint with the Internal Revenue Service against Wisconsin Club for Growth because they, to our mind, were violating their IRS
and what's interesting about
standing.
Wisconsin Club for Growth is how much of that money is actually from Wisconsin.
Oh, I don't even know that. A lot of it was coming, Walker went and sat on the lap of Sheldon Adelson in Las Vegas.
Right. So that name alone is a farce right there.
Yeah, so it's a real problem. But Wisconsin Club for Growth is supposed to be a social welfare organization. It was acting as a political organization primarily.
So that's a good segue. So that's what I was really wondering. I feel like we're going to play whack-a-mole depending on how the rules play out. Where we shoot down these registered political action committees, but then a union group or another sort of nonprofit group kind of takes up where they left off, and I don't know how you draw the line on that and how you actually have that have an impact ahead of an election. You know what I mean? Because I think in retrospect, you can look back and say, well, obviously you didn't spend enough money on nonprofit activities. You spent it on promotion.
Well, if there was a law that said within 60 days you've got to disclose, and you're running an ad that mentions a candidate's name, you got to disclose your donors within 48 hours or something. That way, people at least know who's paying for it. Another answer is public financing.
Right.
And if outside groups then are trying to outspend the candidate who's taken public financing, then that candidate who's taking public financing should get more public financing and equal the playing field that way. And that's illegal right now under U.S. Supreme Court interpretations. That's why I'm in favor of passing an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would proclaim once and for all, corporations aren't persons, money isn't speech, and we can impose sensible limits on donations and require adequate disclosure for our democracy to function. And here in Wisconsin, 78 communities have already signed on to that. Green Bay, Appleton, Neenah, Menasha all voted more than 74% in favor of that.
They'd probably get their way if they actually had some money to back that, right?
Well, I mean, there is a chicken and egg problem here because the politicians, of course, get elected with dirty money, and we're trying to, have them decide because ultimately Congress is going to have to, by 2/3 vote, pass the amendment, and then 3/4 of the states are going to have to ratify it. That's kind of a long-term solution. But
so what's going to happen if the U.S. Supreme Court does not take this case? What's going to happen?
Well, the John Doe 2 investigation would die. Scott Walker would be scot-free, if you'll excuse the expression. And more importantly, it will be impossible for the people of Wisconsin, even if there's a different, more enlightened legislature and more enlightened governor, to pass a law that says if you're an elected official running for office, you can't coordinate with these outside groups, because that would be the Wisconsin Supreme Court's governing law, decision, rule over what happens here in Wisconsin if the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't take the decision. So that would be a real problem.
What is Wisconsin Democracy Campaign going to do to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, we begged the district attorneys to take this case. Actually, I was going on radio giving out their office phone numbers and told them, tell the district attorneys to take this case. If the Supreme Court doesn't take it, we're going to still work on other things. We're going to work on amending the Constitution. We're going to work on public financing. We're going to work on disclosure laws. We're going to work on redistricting so that politicians can't rig the maps. Whichever party wins every 10 years gets to rig the maps in the most distorted way so that party benefits. That's a ridiculous way to draw legislative districts in a democracy. Iowa has been doing it totally differently for the last 35 years. They have career servants, public servants drawing the lines. It works well in Iowa. Why can't it work well here? I mean, it's just ridiculous that we're doing it that old crony way.
Yeah, our gerrymandering problem is out of control. I agree with that.
And there is a federal court that heard a case about the rigged maps, the gerrymandering in June in Madison. I was at the federal courthouse listening to that case. They haven't come down with their decision yet. 3-judge panel. I'm curious as to how they decide because the case was a really interesting and powerful one.
Just as a citizen, I'd like to see that fixed because it's hard to know who's the responsible party for a district.
Yeah, I think most people in Wisconsin, want fair maps. I mean, this idea that just because you win an election, you get all these goodies and can draw a weird size district that throws more people in your party in that district or compacts all your opposing constituents in another district. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
So do you think the presidential race will actually have something, be a factor in what's happening in Wisconsin?
Well,
as far as money and politics and corruption and all of that
possibly
good stuff that's going on here?
We don't endorse candidates. We don't tell people who to vote for or who not to vote for, and I'm real clear on that. Bernie Sanders had made an issue about Citizens United, and he said, if I'm elected, I'm going to have one litmus test for my Supreme Court justice, and it's not abortion rights. It's Citizens United. I'm going to insist that anyone I appoint to the bench is going to overturn Citizens United. After he did that, Hillary Clinton felt the pressure and agreed to do that. So maybe her court appointees would be different than Donald Trump's.
Maybe.
I think
just
even
maybe.
in this 4-4 situation, though. I think even Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the Citizens United decision, would come along and agree to overturn what happened in Wisconsin because they misread what he wrote in the Citizens United decision.
Yeah, I just worry about the unintended consequences of things. And when I hear about a constitutional amendment, it all sounds awesome. It sounds great, and having public financing in theory sounds great. But rich people have a way of getting around things, and
especially when we allow it.
Well,
so aren't you more afraid of those consequences? Like what's literally going to happen if we don't have an amendment?
I feel like even though we don't have completely transparent disclosure, I feel like there's at least some sort of transparency somewhere, and we do get to the root of some of these things. I just worry about once we say outside groups can't talk, we have pure public financing. I feel like things go underground in a way, and that's yep, they won't be able to go on TV because that'll be tracked. But I don't know how you track websites really.
Well, right now, it's like
scale.
a free for all, right? It's like this crazy money orgy that's happening in the state of Wisconsin.
So I almost feel
on all levels.
I almost feel though that helps. Not the super rich, but that helps, medium rich people, and instead we're only going to have influence from the super rich. And I don't know. I'm having a difficulty finding how we actually solve the problem completely, or even 90%.
Right. But right now it is pretty much underground if you can coordinate with these outside groups. For instance, if it weren't for the Guardian story, we never would have known this stuff.
Well, yeah.
And the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and this is the craziest thing of all, they ordered all the documents destroyed. And they then stayed the order so there could be an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. But if they had their way, there would have been a bonfire.
Yeah, that's not shady at all.
And that's kind of crazy. I mean,
that is crazy.
To a great extent, citizens in Wisconsin and around the country, we've been reduced to mere spectators in the political process, and sometimes blindfolded spectators at that because we don't know where the money's coming from. And we need to get to a place in our democracy where we're functioning as a democracy, where everyone has essentially an equal say, an equal voice as to who gets elected, what the policies are. We should be able, that's what a democracy is supposed to be. The people rule.
You mean like a case where someone who's on the ballot in all 50 states should be on the debate stage?
I'm for, I'm for that. I mean, I voted for Ralph Nader and actually worked on his campaign in 2000. And my sister-in-law still thinks, George W. Bush was elected solely because of my efforts, which is a bit crazy.
That is crazy.
People in a democracy should be able to vote for who they want. And also, this is just a word to the Clinton folks. You can't scold people into voting the right way, especially millennials. I mean, this idea that I've got 3 kids who are between the ages of 24 and 30. You cannot scold these folks into voting the right way. No. If you want them to vote for your person, try a little better or more subtle argument than that.
Good call.
Yeah.
So what else we have?
I don't know. It's also interesting. Just why do you think Wisconsin's under this cloud of campaign finance stink right now? What is it?
It's very strange. I came to this state 33 years ago. And when I got here, I thought it was just the cleanest state of all. I came from the suburbs of Chicago. I knew about all the corruption in Chicago. In a way, we're turning like Chicago here in Wisconsin. But there was a problem in 2000, a bipartisan problem with the caucus scandal where the leaders of both parties in the legislature got convicted. And then there's this problem right now. Part of it is the people who get in power think they can do whatever they want and won't get caught. And I think that's a bipartisan problem.
It sure is, yeah. I don't know what we actually do about that. I mean, I hope there's some sort of constitutional amendment that can magically, get us 90% of the way there.
Well, there needs to be accountability somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, people just can't keep getting away with stuff.
When you say it like that, who is going to disagree with that, right? Who's going to say, "Oh no, I don't want accountability"?
Well, accountability regulation is the same thing for some people, and they don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. So if people want to get in touch with you for more information or to support your cause, how would you like them to do that?
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, we are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3. We're tax exempt. We don't do electioneering. Your donations are tax deductible. Just go to our website, WIS for Wisconsin, DC for Democracy Campaign, wisdc.org, and you can see what we've been up to. We post news stories every day, Monday through Friday. And then there's a little donate button there if you want to be generous. We'd appreciate it.
Do you have events or anything that?
We are doing a post-election event on November 10th in Madison at Marigold's Kitchen from 5 to 7. Dale Schultz, the former Republican Senate Majority Leader, and Congressman Mark Pocan will be there, so that's going to be a fun event. We have an annual meeting in in May every year too. We're trying to do more
Awesome.
events. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming all the way from Madison for our 40th episode of Political
Well,
Radar.
congratulations. 40 is something to celebrate.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you.
so. I think it's pretty good. I had a big party for my 40th birthday. I think. I'm not sure if I remember. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. For show notes, you can go to politicalradar.com/40. You can look us up on Twitter, on Facebook, and join the Political Radar community on Facebook. We will talk more about this, I'm sure. I'm sure lots of people are going to want to weigh in on all this finance disclosure stuff. And did I miss anything?
No, not really. How to get in touch with you, Elliot.
Rhonda's giving me the weird look. I think everybody knows how to get in touch with me. I am transparent. I am Elliot on Twitter. I'm Elliot C on Facebook.
And I'm Rhonda at Sitnicow on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Thanks. We're out.
Thanks for listening to Political Radar. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. To stay up to date, visit politicalradar.com or connect with us on Facebook or Twitter.